Hello, my name is Slobodan Vujesic. I'm the co-founder of BDA Therapy, and with this video I'm going to address one very important question, and that is how the BDA relate to walking. So when we think about the walking is quite advanced function that include many things. You know, we need to control our body, we need to weight bear our body, think about balance and many things. So it's quite advanced, and it include a lot of control. But many kids with cerebral palsy, genetical disorder, they have a problem with that. And in BDA we talk a lot about structure. So now some parents are asking the question, well, why is this, how does the structure relate to walking when it's so much, connected with control? Our kids have a problem with control, their brain is damaged, and how the structure is going to really help with this controlling the body, how it's going to help the child to learn to walk. So this is what I'm going to talk about. And one thing which is very important to start with is that we use our body, our structure, as a tool, and this tool is very important for any function, including walking. So this structure that we are not born with a structure that we have, you know, when we are adult. A baby have a different structure. So the structure have its own evolution. It have its own developmental stages. And that is very important for any kind of future function, including walking. So let's talk a little bit about structural development. So let's put it like this. So when the baby is born, the baby actually have a primitive structure. So let's put it like this. It doesn't really have a long neck. So, and they have like a torso, which is more like we call it a monotorso. Now later in the time, the baby develop and is starting to get the neck and the chest, which is actually very important, is starting to be quite wider and very different. Then there is a space between the pelvis and the rib cage. The child start to get the waist, and in time this structure start to develop in very different way. Now at the same time, it's not just that the torso is changing, the spine is following that. So in the beginning, the child have very simple curve without too many physiological curves. Later, the child start to develop further physiological curves, neck curve, thoracic curve, and all these curves are actually very important for standing. Because when we are standing, the position of our pelvis, the position of our spine, all that is actually very important for these functions. Because when we are walking, we are using our spine for balancing our body, we are using our pelvis, all that is very important. And if it's not functioning very properly, then the child is going to have quite a lot of problems. But it's very important to understand that there is evolution of the torso, evolution of the spine, and what influences these structures is actually the child's daily spontaneous activity. So you see, the thing is, the child very often have a lack of daily spontaneous activities. If it have a brain damage, if it have a genetical disorder, it doesn't matter. If the child have this problem with the different varieties of the daily spontaneous activities, the child's structure is going to suffer and the child will not develop in the proper way. On the other hand, it's not just about what the child is doing, but it's also how the child's structure is responding during the weight bearing, and how does it actually move during different kind of types of child activities. So the child with developmental issues have actually problem with the structural development as well. And in the beginning, the child have quite simple structure like a baby. And this is where the problem actually starts, because further on, the child do not really develop as it should, but the child become bigger, but many segments in the body, the structure actually stay underdeveloped, very much simple, like from its starting position. So the child could grow, but is not really gaining the wide chest. The chest is quite small. There is no long neck. The torso is still very simple. And the child is basically getting bigger and bigger, but it's not really getting everything that it's supposed to get in order to provide easier new structural, new functional abilities. So then it's the easiest way to, if you think about the spine, we are supposed to get these 3 curves in the spine, 3 physiological curves, but the child might not get that. The child could be stuck in 1 curve. So this heavily influences the position of the pelvis. So if the child does not have 3 physiological curves, if it have only 1 curve and it's arching forward, then the child is going to stand with a very, very big curve in its own back, and that is going to make walking and using of the legs very hard. Also, the child will start to feel very uncomfortable in the back. This is where the child will start to feel like there is a lot of stress on the back while the child is standing. And on the other hand, the child can compensate by creating 1 single big curve forward, but then the pelvis is more tilted backwards, which then bring the legs in this position where the knees are bended, and that create a lot of strain on the child muscles. Now, on the other hand, the child there is different variations how the child could actually hold its own body, but this is the most common. And the problem that happens is, if the child do not have developed 3 physiological curves, then the child will have a problem with counterbalancing. What the healthy child can do very easily is control the pelvis. So basically, the pelvis, like this is looking from the front, the child can make different kind of movement of the pelvis left and right, but this section of the body, this stay in the place. So only the pelvis goes left and right. But if the child do not have proper physiological curves, the child cannot isolate that one part of the body move and the other part is stable. What happens is, when the child is moving the pelvis, everything goes into the big movement, and that is causing a lot of problems for the child to stand, walk, and do whatever he is doing. Then the child will compensate with the legs, and this can result with different kind of deformations where the legs can go into kind of this position and the arms could come in this position, which is a very, very familiar way of walking. So that is basically when the child is using the legs in order to try to establish the control of the pelvis, and it's raising up the arms because the child is using the arms in order to balance itself. The child is using the arms for balancing. So if the child have this kind of structural impairments, because instead of developing in the proper way, it's developing in such a way that the spine is not developing physiological curves, the child, because of that, simply doesn't have a proper tool which will allow the child to do some things without too much muscle effort, then, the child is growing, the functions are coming, the child is then trying to learn new things, it's coming to the phase of walking, but the spine is not developed properly, the pelvis position is not so good. And then what happens when you teach the child, you have difficulties to teach the child to do something in the proper way because the child structure is not really supporting that. Then there is a motivational problem because it's related with energy. The child is using too much energy to do something, and if it's too energy costly, then the child by itself is not trying to do it as much. And then if the child is walking in a way that is that basically mean with the crossed legs, overarching back and all these things, then what happens is the child starts to get issues with the pain, which are connected with many degenerative processes in the body, because the child is using many joints and the structure in such a way that mean there is a lot of stress on those structures. And then what happens is many kids, after some time, they start to say, well, my knees are in pain, I start to feel the pain in my back. And basically what happens is they start to walk less and less if the walking for them from the start was very hard, because really their structure is not supporting that. So this basically means the child in the beginning is progressing, and then coming to 7 years old, 8, 9, 10, 11, then it's slowly starting to go down with its own function. So why this? Why is this happening? Well, in the beginning, every new stage that the child was doing, so let's say in the beginning there was a problem for the child to lay on the stomach and be on the elbows, then the crawling was hard for the child, then that means also sitting was difficult. Every one of these things that the child was doing, later being on the knees, or on the end even walking, actually mean each one of these things that the child learned to do was doing in a little bit different way, and the child's structure was also developing in a different way. So on the end, when the child came here, it didn't had all these physiological curves which is basically supposed to have. Physiological curve like that, it had actually not such a good, let's say, developed spine and torso and pelvis, and all these structures was really not meant to allow the child to walk. But at this stage here, the child actually gained a lot of weight, a lot of length, and that made the child a lot of problems. So then what happened, the child started to walk more and more in the position where it's actually bending the knees, or it's perhaps arching the back quite a lot, and all that is causing quite a lot of problem for the child. So this is where BDA step in. We are aware of these issues. We are aware that the child through time is developing in a way that is really making many functions quite difficult for the child. So we stimulate with different kind of techniques proper development of the child. We are streaming development of the spine, torso, pelvis, many joints, and we are basically unleashing all the potentials of the child in order to change these disadvantages, change this curve. So BDA is assessing the child in a current state, wherever it is. And for us, it's not only important what the child is doing. It is also important how the child structure developed, and according to how it's the child using the structure, we can see where it's going. So we are streaming the development of the structure and its own relationship with the function in order to get this. In order not to come in the situation where the child structure is simply not able to support what it already achieved until the child age before the puberty, and not able to provide further development in the new skills because it is simply too difficult. So, unleashing the further potentials to make things long-lasting viable, so that the function is like very something which the child can rely on for a long period of time. This is our big focus. So we focus on the breathing because we want to influence development of the chest. We focus on the spine mobility because we want to influence the development of the physiological curves. We focus on weight bearing, how the structure is going to respond in the situations where the child put stress on its own body. And all that is actually very important for energy efficiency, because the more the child is energy efficient, the more you are seeing that the child is doing certain things by himself spontaneously. And this is the source of the biggest, let's say, that's the source of the whole development thing. It's not about what the child is doing during the therapy. It's what the child is doing during the rest of the day, what the child is doing spontaneously. And here we can see some nice examples. For example, here on the left side, we can see how the child is sitting with a quite very much tilted pelvis on the back, and the child is sitting on the sacrum with very big curve in the back, and here we can see completely different position of the pelvis. It's the same child after about 1 year of BDA therapy. And we can see what is happening here. When we say to the child, come on, be straight, put your body in the straight position, you can see how much the child is struggling in order to make the physiological curves in the back. While on the other hand, you can see obviously how the situation is on the left side, but when we after some period of time with the BDA therapy, we can see completely different development of the spine and ability that the spine provides the child, and that is ability in this point is much better sitting comparison how it was before. Here it is, very nice example. We can see child sit in its own kind of comfort, spontaneous position. The pelvis is tilted very much backwards. The spine have one very big curve, and on the other hand, here we can see, what do we see? We see curves. So we see the physiological curves with very different sitting platform. So here we are going to see how all these changes converted into how these changes at the level of the spine converted into walking. But before that, it is also important to point out that it's not enough just to work on the spine. It is also very important to work on the rib cage, because the rib cage is connected with the spine. So if the rib cage have a very poor shape, not proper depth and volume, it will influence the spine as well. So here we can see on the left side how it was before, and on the right side we can see after the BDA therapy, and look how the child was breathing. When the child inhaled the air, the lower ribs would expand, but not much the upper part. And then what happened is, in time, the rib cage is not really gaining the proper depth. And here we can see a completely different way of breathing. So you can see before BDA the child was breathing like this, and then the child started to breathe like this. This volume of the rib cage will influence very much the form and the way how the torso will develop, including the rib cage, which is of course very important for walking, many other functions. On the picture on the left side, she was actually just started to go on her elbows, on her knees, just starting to bring the pelvis up, and that was difficult for her. And that was not even her first course. She was coming, it was her about third course, and this was a progress. She got better, so much better, that she was able to bring her bum up. So she started with much worse condition. It's just we didn't record her walking, because at that stage there was, she couldn't walk at all. Her knees would just buckle. And here we can see amazing, beautiful, functional improvements. There is still a lot of work to be done, but she is now much better, able to stand by herself and make some steps. Structure determinate function. Function determinate development of the structure. So if the child's structure is not making easy for the child to do many things, the child will do it in his own way. And his own way will be what the child feels as its own natural way of movement. And even if that is not correct, the child doesn't care. The child will just feel what he can do, and he will do it according to that, what is easy and what is possible for him. And this is our main focus, how to help the child to do more things, and what it's already doing to do it more easily, more energy efficient, more sustainable, in a sustainable way. So I hope you started to get an idea how working on the structure unleash all potentials for the child's future development, structural as well functional. And I'm looking forward to hear any of your questions and comments.